Hey guys, so I'm Rosco. I work on a project called Revoke.cash, which is a security-focused project that allows you to manage your token approvals. And today I kind of want to share the story of how it got started and what crypto looked like back then, what it looks like today, and kind of what changed in crypto and exploits, scams, and sort of what Revoke is doing around that. So let me take you back to 2019 when crypto was a lot smaller than it is today. I recently looked at the TVL back then. It was under $500 million, which, looking back then, it was still was really a lot. But looking at today's figures, that's not too much. And DeFi was coming. There were obviously a lot of things in development, but it really wasn't as big as it is today. And most things that we know today were still being developed. Things like Aave and other big DeFi platforms. So in October of 2019, I attended DEF CON 5 in Osaka, and there I met this guy, Paul Berg, the creator of Sablier, which is like a money streaming platform. And he gave this presentation about ERC20 allowances, these token approvals, and basically how this is such a big part of all of DeFi, really. Like if you want to swap tokens, you have to approve your tokens. If you want to sell an NFT, you have to approve it on OpenSea. But how back then, at least, we really didn't think about any of the risks associated with that. And I really got inspired by his talk. So 3 days after the conference, after his talk, I launched the first version of Revoke.cash, which looked like this. So I took this screenshot pretty recently, so it looked maybe a little bit neater back then because there wasn't such a big amount of scam tokens and like spam stuff in people's wallets. But yeah, super basic, just an overview of your token balances and all the approvals you had. But it was better than having nothing, right? And so over sort of the months that followed, I kind of improved a bit on it, added some additional features. And that was in 2020, and then later that year, of course, if you were around, you couldn't have missed DeFi Summer, which is what for a lot of people was their introduction to DeFi and to sort of yield and all these staking things, but also to the more to the risks of it all. There were plenty of forks of like these food-themed farms that most of which were like rug pools. So there's also really the point where a lot of people got introduced to the fact that you have to be really careful with what you do with your money. And while some projects, like for example this Unicats, which was obviously a rug pool, also stole approved funds. Most of them didn't really do anything with your token approvals, and it was mostly about your deposited funds that were at risk. So a lot of people, while they did get introduced to the idea that they had to be careful, the whole sort of risk about token approval still wasn't really ingrained in a lot of people's minds. But then in February of 2021, I think this was the moment that really the sort of risk and the sort of danger of these approvals came to light for a lot of people with the Fur Combo hack. And Fur Combo was this platform that allowed you to sort of chain together different DeFi transactions. And they got exploited, and they didn't just lose the sort of the deposited money to the hacker, but also all of the approved funds just from the safety of people's wallets. I think a lot of people here started to realize, there's some dangers there. And of course, 2021 it's also sort of the start of sort of the NFT hype. Of course, NFTs were a thing before that, but I think for a lot of people, 2021 is when that really took off. So obviously for NFTs, you have the sort of the same concept. Like if you want to sell an NFT on OpenSea, you still have to give OpenSea access to your NFTs. So also in 2021, I added support for NFTs to the project, and at the same time, there was another big trend in crypto where back in 2019, it was mostly Ethereum in terms of like smart contracts, but nowadays and in the past couple of years, we've seen that there's been a lot more other chains being used as well, other smart contract chains. So I really had to support all of that as well, because it's not up to me to figure out who should use what chain for their things, right? So in the meantime, and so eventually that that ended up in sort of this whole new version of Revoke.cash that I released earlier this year. That is sort of more flexible into the future. So if we go back to this sort of first exploit that people experienced with their approved funds, over the past years, that one big exploit turned into dozens with hundreds of millions of dollars in approved funds stolen from people's wallets. Most recently, there was the sushi swap exploit in April, and I think that really demonstrated as well that sushi swap is an established brand, an established project in the space. But that does not make them immune to being exploited, having their smart contracts hacked, and because of these approvals, that also means that your the funds actually in your wallet could be at risk as well. So that kind of led to another more like sort of evolution of what Revoke.cash can do. With the exploit checker that we launched earlier this year as well, because there are so many exploits that happened, and every time something like this happens, you see all over Twitter, people are sharing this news with each other. They're saying, oh, check Revoke.cash, or like check your approvals, or do this, do that. But for a lot of people, it's not really clear what any of that means, right? So this kind of comes in as a sort of simple solution where people can just check in one click whether they're safe, because that's kind of all they care about at that point. Am I safe, or am I affected? And if I'm affected, what do I do about that, right? And so, well, on the one hand, we have all these sort of smart contract hacks, and smart contract hacks. Some of them do have these approved funds at risk, while others don't. And of course, the ones that don't have it at risk, those have been even bigger in the past years. There have been billions stolen from smart contract hacks. I think earlier today here was also a talk about bridges, and how bridges were, I think, the most hacked thing in all of crypto. But at the same time, besides these smart contract hacks and these exploits, we've also seen a huge rise in scams and phishing over the past years. And so when I created Revoke.cash back in 2019, this was not on my mind at all. Really, sort of the issue that I foresaw then was sort of what we just discussed about, smart contract hacks. Even if it's an established contract, what if 3 years down the line, it still gets exploited somehow, and then you still have all of these old token approvals lying around to these smart contracts. you might be vulnerable. But then what I didn't foresee is all of this, where crypto has grown so much in the past 3 years, has so many more users, and also kind of perhaps NFTs brought in also a new kind of user that kind of, yeah, like all of that sort of attention and all of that growth, of course, attracts scammers as well. And this is an interesting one as well that we saw, I think earlier this year, where Kevin Rose had over $1 million stolen from his wallet through one of these phishing websites. And well, while Revoke.cash, the sort of token approvals platform, it can definitely help with these kinds of cases. It's not the full picture. So last year, I developed a browser extension, the Revoke browser extension, which kind of complements the token approvals platform by adding sort of warnings when you're about to, for example, give a token approval, but also certain other kinds of harmful actions, such as listing NFTs for sale. Because one of these things, for example, what happened to Kevin Rose, is these phishing websites, they try to make you sign a message that essentially just puts all your approved NFTs that you have approved to OpenSea, put it all for sale for 0 ETH, for example. So these kinds of things, this browser extension warns you for. And it's still up to the user to figure out what to do with that, right? So if you go to Uniswap and you want to swap tokens, and you get this pop-up that says, hey, this website's asking you for an approval for your USDC, if that's what you're trying to swap, then it's pretty easy to figure out, that makes sense. That's what I'm trying to do. But if you're on, for example, an airdrop website, and then it asks you to approve all of your Bored Apes, then hopefully you'll be able to figure out that that is a scam just by having that extra pop-up that makes you think twice. And the nice thing about the way this is set up as well is that out of the box, it works for every EVM chain. So again, it doesn't matter, which chain you prefer to use. The important part is that you're able to stay safe. So I want to kind of finish this talk with a few tips for about like what I've seen in the past years and how to go about that. So as I mentioned before, there's kind of two things. The first is smart contract hacks. I think one good way to protect against that is using Revoke.cash to limit your token approvals, so that in a lot of these smart contract hacks, people had approved these allowances, these approvals, like a year earlier, 2 years earlier even, and then sometime down the line, an exploit was discovered, and they still lost their funds. So there usually in these cases is a lot of time to sort of revoke those approvals. If you are done using an app, like after you swap, after you've maybe withdrawn all of your stake tokens, that's probably a good time to just make sure that you don't have any sort of open permissions, open connections. But also, as we discussed before, there's a lot of smart contract hacks that don't actually concern these approved funds. So you also just have to be very careful about, where you deposit your funds in the first place. And I think, that's always a case-by-case basis, but something that has been around for years and has been audited and hopefully doesn't have any upgradable contract. Something like Uniswap is probably a lot safer to put your money in than something that just came around the corner, which again takes us back to sort of DeFi summer, when new forks of these liquidity providing things were popping up every week, and people were losing a lot of money. And then there's the phishing scams. And again, one good thing to do is again limit your token approvals, especially for things like OpenSea and other NFT marketplaces. and that's again for the case, like for example, with Kevin Rose's exploit, you know, um, the thing that these scammers do is they try to trick you into signing these marketplace listings, but they can only do that for the tokens that you have an approval for to these marketplaces. So if you don't have those in the first place, then your wallet is a little bit safer. And one other thing is using a hardware wallet and separating your assets between the hardware wallet and maybe a hot wallet. And for these kind of smart contract hacks, using a hardware wallet isn't really going to help you. But against phishing, it can definitely be that extra step that you need to not get phished. And then finally, there are several security-focused browser extensions on the market, such as the one that I talked about from Revoke.cash, but also some others like WalletGuard or Pocket Universe, which just have some different trade-offs, and you could even just use all of them together to just be double protected. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you guys for your attention.
So we have 3 minutes to the next turnover. I can do one question really quick.
Thank you very much for the nice talk and also for the great product. I'm wondering, what's the future for the space? So for example, do you think that the Uniswap permit mechanism solves this somehow, or is it just an incremental step? Maybe there are other things that are important, and this is again related to what's next for Revoke.cash, where it is going as a product. Thanks.
Yeah, I think, yeah, so in some way, permits can definitely help with this. So a few years ago, I would have said, yeah, these sort of signature based allowances, like these permits, are great, and that allows you to just basically set the right approval every time you make a swap on Uniswap, for example, so you don't ever have any leftover approvals, ideally. But then what we saw with the phishing websites, for example, a lot of people have this idea that signatures are somehow safer than transactions, which is really not the case, especially when you're looking at this kind of signature-based approvals. So it comes with a different trade-off again, but I think a lot of that also comes down to more education and having people understand that signatures are dangerous as well, and a lot of other things about safety. So I think that's also something that I want to focus on more for Revoke.cash, is providing more of that education and telling people more about how can they stay safe, and what does an approval even mean, and just all of that.